Hello, hello. I am Emma King. Welcome to today's session where we'll discuss the idea of creating one event strategy with in-person and digital events. As you'll see in the chat room, we posed a question. Where are you joining us from, and how many events have you been to this year? Would love to know the difference between those you attended in person versus those you attended virtually. And while you're typing that, if you haven't already, just going to do some housekeeping. The chat room is there for us to, interact and engage with each other. If you have any questions specifically for myself and our speaker, Bob Chain, today, then please use the Q&A. You'll see the panel on the, that way. There you go. Panel on the left there will be open. You've got, oh look, it's jiggling too. So you've got the Q&A. You can learn more about us as speakers, and there's also a resources tab for any materials that we are downloading. And just so you're aware, in this particular technology we're using today, you can resize the window. So if you want to resize everything, you can do that simply by dragging and dropping the corners. And then if you decide that the design that you have made is not to your liking, you can always reset it using the reset icon, which is a circle with an arrow on it. So knowing we only have 30 minutes and knowing the content that we need to share, I want to introduce to you our speaker today. Bob Chain is the Director of Account Management of North America for Swapcard and is a skilled, experiential marketing professional, sales leader, and event producer with expertise in live and virtual events and channels. And Bob has an extensive bio, so please make sure you click on the speakers link to be able to see his bio. Bob, hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much, Emma. It is a pleasure to be here with everyone joining. I've been seeing in the chat that there have been a lot of Midwesterners joining and a lot of representation from Chicago as well. So it's exciting to see everyone joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, go Midwest. So I know from our pre-calls, we could talk endlessly about, the way that the event industry is changing and evolving. And I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of questions from the audience as well, knowing the questions that I want to ask you myself. But if you do have any questions, guys, as I said, pop them into the Q&A. So Bob, in your role at Swapcard, of specifically negotiating multi-year deals, where are you seeing your clients investing their dollars across the multi-years? Is the trend still investing in live streaming to a hybrid audience?
Yeah, that's a real big question, Emma. I would say, and for the audience today, a little bit on my background is obviously, Swapcard being in the virtual and in-person technology space. I spent about a decade producing in-person first experiences leading up into the pandemic. So I kind of come with that lens of, the large scale association in mind. And I think that today, this idea and predisposed notion of what hybrid comes with, maybe the baggage is the best way we can put it, can be detrimental today. And I would say that, when we're talking about the investments, I would say that a lot of people are moving away from the idea of hybrid being this simultaneous experience. We all are learning that live streaming is not necessarily the cheapest solution out there. And also from a event strategy standpoint, I think the biggest barrier today, maybe outside of a dollar and cents standpoint, is the human capital that is needed to invest, knowing that each audience really needs to have their own unique goals, focuses, and really stakeholders. And as we've seen with a lot of the industry news, these different strategies are changing every 3 to 4 months. I would say that, Emma, we could have this same exact conversation here 6 months from now, that and maybe the content would be completely different. So I would say that when it comes strictly from an investment standpoint, I would say that majority of my partners today are focusing on that in-person first experience, where we are still capturing that content at that in-person experience, and then using that to rebroadcast to a targeted digital first audience. Now, these are two separate experiences and things like that. And I think everyone on this in the audience today can also confirm that just putting videos on demand is not a feasible solution, or not a way to target a digital audience. We're not getting the views. At the end of the day, we are not a YouTube style of content delivery. There's a lot of strategies around that we can start to dive into throughout today's conversation. But I think a recent post that Julia Solaris made on LinkedIn about this idea of less being more, and the idea that, we've been capturing all of this content and things. And thank you, Emma, for throwing that into the chat as well for anyone who's interested.
Of course.
But exclusivity is really a great strategy to test. We're starting to enter this idea of scientific approaches within our space to know exactly that I'm targeting XYZ profiles. And to those separate profiles, there's different engagement tactics and ways that we can connect with those people. And they really should be directly independent and personalized.
Yeah, and Bob, when we think about that personalized experience, are we thinking about different roles that people perform? Are we thinking about different age groups? How do we structure that experience?
Yeah, so I think that really is, I would say, vertical specific, given the audience that you are serving and organizing for. From when we take that 10,000 foot view, we can really start to kind of create some general assumptions. We have our super users, our tenured members of our organizations. These are our super users. They've been involved. They're probably in the later stages of their career, and probably only have a limited runway to still participate and invest in our organization. We have that kind of entering stage, those kind of middle of the career age groups, those maybe middle managers, early managers that are going to be probably our focus as an organization a lot of times. And then we have those young professionals, which obviously is the future of any organization, but also sometimes the hardest to connect with, especially knowing the investments today that are required to experience an in-person event. I know that it took me 9 years into my career before my organization would invest in me to actually attend one of these in-person events. And that was a very, very long period of time for me to only participate maybe in a regional level or things like that. Today, there's a lot of new ways or new tactics to start to be able to connect with people where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steve saying that he loves to hear you talking about the science of engagement. That's something that we at BDance, really recognize that, when you are developing an event, you need to be thinking about the engagement strategy for the physical audience, if it's a simultaneous virtual audience, but then also that on demand, how do you sort of like drive that experience? So I'm going to jump to another question here. What trends are you seeing regarding the digital audience versus the physical audience? Are you thinking that we need to, you mentioned before that you think these events should be separate, right? Do you think that the planning group, the teams need to be separate?
I don't necessarily think that the teams need to be separate. And I know that on that topic, Emma, you have some ideas and thoughts as well. So I'll be interested to hear kind of your response to this. But I would say that the planning groups should be, if not the same, should have definite overlaps of influence, because really we need to be thinking about like what is our goal for gathering these individuals, whether it be a in-person first experience or a digital experience. Are we doing it to drive revenue for the greater organization? Is this what keeps our lights on for the rest of the calendar year, as well as potentially fund a lot of the activist work or different trade-based experiences that we put on? Is this to increase our membership? Are we viewing this as strictly a opportunity to potentially drive people to these either revenue opportunities, or is this a opportunity to reinforce the value to your existing base? Each of these kind of ultimate goals should have a unique strategy to them. And I think that that's where today there's a lot of uncertainty and confusion, as we all know. We just saw a week ago, Skift put out a article that essentially stated that 65% of the attendance that we're seeing from pre-pandemic is what we are going to now be up against. And that is a big red flag and very concerning for a lot of organizations. If we're only going to achieve 65% of the attendance we did pre-pandemic. Now, that article has also quoted that, this gives our organizers an opportunity to kind of bring forward this growth mentality, or like a more sales approach to it, is that, and this is actually a quote from Ken Holsinger with Freeman from that article, that for attendance to start trending upward, event planners must employ a growth mindset rather than one of recovery. And that they'll need to really employ some strategic initiatives to find and attract new audiences. We look at even our industry. There's been a lot of people that have changed jobs or in new positions, even new industries. These are potentially new targets and things like that. Steve put up a great point that the 65% is not sustainable. Now, we've also seen Skift come out and say today, or earlier this week, that come 2023, the meetings and events industry is going to be fully recovered by 2023. I mean, that completely kind of contradicts what's coming out.
I saw the headline. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I saw the headline, but I didn't fully read the article. Are they saying for physical events, or are they saying, is that what they're focusing on in the article, that physical events will be back up?
It was a bit of a focus on physical events. I think the focus of that article was that 65% stat was based off of in-person physical attendance. And I don't think what it's taking into account is that today there are people that may have historically gone to an in-person event once every other year, every 4 years, something along that, for whether it be continuing education credits or just to be part of the greater industry, that today, for them, it is virtual first experiences that connect with them. One of my own partners who I work with very, very closely, Daryl Diamond from Tally Event Strategies, and he was actually recently quoted in a NPR article about his approach to some of the events that he oversees. Now, it's primarily in the medical field, which comes with its own unique practices and audience, but he shares that, we essentially charge the same amount for the meeting, whether the person is in person or virtual. The content to them stays the same. The only thing that we're adjusting is the way that the individuals access that. And so when we look at, the economics and things like that from the financial stability that Steve was mentioning in the chat, we can start to see, okay, sure, there's lesser overall cost for those virtual audiences since we're putting forward a pricing strategy that doesn't cannibalize that in-person audience. There's that trade-off with those that who are attending virtually is that, they're not paying for the travel, the housing, or the time away from work. And knowing that their audience is primarily doctors and other healthcare professionals, for them, that's time that they can be with patients. So there is kind of going back to some of those industry specific or vertical specific approaches and strategies that we can start to take. I think that that's where this idea of the hyper personalization and going back to those root goals is so important at any type of strategy. And I think that if you as an organizer are able to come to me or to any either technology provider, event strategist, and say, this is the persona I'm looking to target. This is what my goals are at the end of the day. Like, this is what I need to achieve to keep this going. That is something that is so important.
Yeah, and you mentioned the role of, speaking to the technology company or to event strategists. As an event strategist, I feel that so many associations and also sort of in the business sector, they have a tried and tested model for their event. And from an engagement perspective, we need to shift gears. They need to shift gears, right? So working with event strategists every year, right, to look at the data, look at how they were engaged, how their audiences were engaged, which topics people took for the CPE and the CMEs, etc. And how people interacted is a driver for how they design their next conference. I saw you kind of smile and nod there. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really interesting point with that is, pre-pandemic, we were living in a innovation cycle of close to a calendar year. We would host this large gathering. We would debrief. We would take tons of surveys. We would get data. We were getting data. That's nothing new. But
Right.
to create those kind of 1 or 2 degrees of variation, it would take a whole lot of investment and a whole lot of time to do so. I think that that's where the exciting thing is today, is that this idea of like hypothesis, test, measure, modify, and repeat is something that we can start to do with both in-person events, but also digital first experiences, which do have a lower lift, as well as potentially even some of our digital marketing strategy, like the ways that we have all of this recorded content. How can we start to test and re-engage with these audiences or create new monetization strategies to test these new opportunities? Now, this probably goes back to the challenge that everyone in the audience is saying, like, of course, Bob, that's a great idea. I would love to do that, but I'm a team of 3. I need to still deliver a amazing annual event that keeps the lights on while doing everything else you're describing. And I think one of the things that I've started to see a lot more recently with our partners or even in industry associations is, take a look at that audience and find those super users or those that are truly invested in the success of your organization, your corporation, or things like that. If we look at some of the organizations that I've referenced already today, MPI, PCMA, IAEE, a lot of these have very, very robust volunteer programs where we can start to maybe lean on those audiences, those super users, those who are heavily invested in the success of your organization, to take the lead on one of these tests, or to start to drive these different ways that coming out of those experiences, then your organization has additional data sets that didn't require the same amount of lift for you as an organizer.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I asked in the chat, but it's very quiet out there. Come on, guys. do you use the data? I want to ask this to you, to the audience. Do you use the data that you gather at your events to look at that engagement strategy? But also, another question, and a question to you, Bob. Are you seeing that people are changing the way they are engaging with participants pre-event, maybe 2 weeks before, and post-event? Are they starting to drip content out to their audience ahead of the event in the form of marketing? Where are you seeing that trend going?
Yeah, and I think kind of hitting on the do you use data coming out of your event, I would say that now I have nothing more than anecdotal evidence to this, but I would say that from an industry standpoint, we're still in the minority of those actually using data to create active decisions in that. Now, this is definitely growing, and we're seeing a trend of being able to easily analyze and visualize that. But I think we're still in the infancy. Then, Emma, to your point of the kind of drip campaigns and content and things like that, I think that the period of time outside of the plane hitting the tarmac that is becoming most important is that period of time leading up to the event, because that's where we're not only driving either adoption from the drip campaign, the marketing tools and things like that, but we're also setting a precedent and getting that excitement for those audiences. And I think that that's where we see the greatest value proposition, because when we think about in-person experiences, the investment is so high for an individual to be there that they need to be coming out of that event with very, very tactful and specific value propositions that, hey, I went to this event, I achieved XYZ, so that I can go back to my leadership and say, here's why you need to send me back to this event next year. And that few week period leading up to the in-person event is absolutely crucial and required to achieve that. Now, the post-event, Emma, that you were referencing is really interesting, because I think that that's where we can start to kind of reinforce and remind and kind of hook that individual if we're looking to kind of use those mass gatherings as ways to introduce, cross-pollinate to everything else that we do as an organization. There's so many ways that we can approach that.
Yeah, so post event, it's about repurposing, redesigning, collaborating with all of the content. Now, we've got a question from the audience here. Are event planners making a mistake in their emotional, and that's in brackets with a question mark, right? Rush back to in-person events? It seems like they're prematurely abandoning the need to provide a robust digital experience, especially if fewer are attending in person. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, once again, I come from an in-person background, so that emotional connection, I feel that sentiment. I'm there with you. I had the same kind of feeling coming out of, I would say, June 2021, before that second wave of COVID came, that I'm like, guys, we're back. This is great. I think that the challenge is that when we're looking at the economics and business models that exist today for those digital first experiences, I think that's the probably greatest constraint or barrier, is that, Emma, you said it yourself, is that business model for large scale in-person events is tried and true. And I think it's less a emotional connection, but also this idea of, at the end of the day, this is what we have survived on. And this is what we have been able to support the audiences that we serve. the 65% that we've been referencing today, these different articles, the uncertainty in the market, the fact that the industry publications are changing their focuses week to week, month to month. One, it shows that we need to kind of keep our hand on the pulse so that we can be one of the early actors whenever we do kind of start to see these trends or elements picking up that we can reproduce and replicate for our own organizations, but also really start to see, all of the different ways that we may need to start to test and ideate on if we don't get the same level of attendance and sponsorships and participation at these larger scale experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a conversation going on in the chat here. I don't know, while you were talking, I'm not sure if you were able to see it, but Tom is sharing that, data is a great justification for strategy. And, Steve shares that spot on. And, with your comment, Bob, that the event industry is in the infancy of event intelligence. So Tom also added that, data is also a way to see some of the things that you may not want to admit. And I guess that's my point to associations and others, right? If you're seeing a drop in attendance, despite offering significant education programs for people, maybe reach out and we can talk about changing the way we do things. So we met at EMS, an event that was the Event Marketing Summit. And we at BDance were delivering a program called The Scoop. And we interviewed you, and we then supplied you post-event with that recording. How did you leverage that content, and what value did that bring to you at Swapcard?
Yeah, it was actually a really good experience and time to be back on site. And I think that this is kind of one of those practice what you preach type of moments where I know from whether it be through Swapcard or my own personal experience of, trying to recycle, utilize these contents and things like that. And I was tactful about this, knowing that the focus of the Scoop was a digital extension of the event, and then letting some time pass, knowing that there was immediate engagements and things like that coming out of the experience, and then starting to repost that and engage. And it was great because it started to reinforce a lot of the messaging now that time had passed, to kind of reiterate the points and even adjust some of the topics to say, just like Tom was referencing in the chat, where was I right? Where was I wrong? But also then being able to bring additional eyes that would have never seen those initial experiences with the Scoop, just because it's different audiences, different connections, and ultimately probably led us to this conversation here today with everyone.
Yeah, and that just ties into the overall experience of taking content that's been streamed, delivered live, and repurposing it, down the line that connects with a new audience and can expand your overall reach. We've got 2 minutes left. I see again, Steve. Steve's very vocal today. Chatting as well about this infancy. I mentioned it before from Steve's post, and as we wrap up this session, what would you say is sort of the next step? We're kind of in kindergarten now. What's going to take us to first grade?
I think the next step is making sure that you're able to clearly identify the targeted purpose for every single experience, action, piece of content that you take and do. If you're able to do that, that will allow you to then be able to directly assess, attribute, and improve upon it. And I think that if you're able to answer those few questions, as simple as they are, in a very targeted fashion, you actually are separating yourself from the pack today.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Bob, I wish we had longer. This has been a great conversation. I know we're going to talk again on this in the future, because as you said, this is something that we have to keep revisiting. We have to keep revisiting because there is evolution in the way that events are running. And right now, a single event structure may not be the overall goal for companies, but maybe in the future that is the correct way to be going. So speak to event strategists. Awesome. I'm going to wrap that up. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Let us know, right? Reach out to us on LinkedIn, Facebook. We've got BDance channels. Let us know other topics that you would like to hear us discuss. And we'll check in with you, one of the speakers from BDance, in the very near future. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you.